Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Did Shakespeare. My name is Cassidy Cash. Each week, we dive into the history of William Shakespeare to take a tidbit of his life and take a look at what it would have been like to live with that in the 16th and 17th century. This week, we're taking a look at how people slept in Elizabethan England, specifically at what they wore. Now, if you've looked at the history of fashion in Elizabethan England, that is a broad topic. So we're narrowing it down a little bit to only the nightcap, which is something people would have worn at night to sleep. And we're doing that and taking our little exploration by asking, did Shakespeare wear a nightcap? In the British Isles, before the invention of central heating, things got really cold at night, and it was quite common, even as late as the 14th century, well before William Shakespeare. It was well established for people to wear a nightcap. The nightcap was a piece of cloth. Now, for women, this was kind of a wrapped covering that went around their head, but for men, it was a cap. Now, this was made famous by Charles Dickens in A Christmas Carol when Ebenezer Scrooge is sitting by the fire in his nightcap, and it's this long, pointy cap with a ball on the end. And it was kind of this immortalized the idea of a nightcap that's well and gone out of fashion for today. But men wore this long pointed cloth hat with the weight on the end of it to cover their neck when they were sleeping. It's quite comical today, but for them it was really very intentional. It seems, though, that the idea of having a long pointy one that hung over the back of your neck to keep your neck warm was something that didn't come into fashion until more like the 18th century. For William Shakespeare, these caps would have looked very different. So let's explore what they would have looked like. The very first recorded use of the word nightcap was spelled all one word as nightcaps with two P's and an ES. So night capes is kind of how it looks on paper. This was recorded by a haberdasher in London named Thomas True in 1378. He made about a dozen of these to sell. And I can't find references to nightcaps specifically in the dialogue of William Shakespeare's plays, but I'm highly suspicious that in Taming of the Shrew, when Kate is presented with a cap and gown from a tailor and a haberdasher, that what they might be talking about in that scene is actually night clothes and a cap for sleeping. I think that as a possibility. I have no evidence to suggest that that's actually true. I didn't have time to go deep into that contention, but I think it's a good question worth asking, especially since in Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew, the Petruchio is denying Kate of very basic needs. He's keeping food from her, he's making sure she doesn't sleep, and a cap and gown would have been considered a basic need. He's not allowing her luxuries, and this is something that was ordered for her. So she's not necessarily getting something fancy or well-to-do. This would have been some kind of basic thing that he doesn't want her to have. So it makes sense to me to think that it would have been a cap and gown, especially since Shakespeare's very familiar with using the word hat in several other places in his plays. And the cap, while with the notable exception of Henry V and a few other places where the cap is referring to things like the Monmouth cap, so not all the uses by any stretch of the word cap in Shakespeare's plays apply to a nightcap. I just think that is an interesting topic. So if you like a research topic and you want to look into that and let me know, please go find out and post your answer in the comments. That's just my suggestion. I'm totally just talking off in left field for a minute. Bringing it back to the nightcap, you can find styles online of actual nightcaps from the 16th and 17th century. I found 3 that I want to show you today, but I will link below the show notes to an article that has several, because there are museums around the world that have artifacts like these where you can see them. These artifacts are where I get my conclusion that William Shakespeare, if he slept in a nightcap, which it seems highly likely that he would have, but if he slept in a nightcap, he wouldn't have had the long pointy one like Ebenezer Scrooge. Instead, he would have had something very similar to what we think of as a skull cap today. Here in the United States, we call these beanies sometimes. They're just these tight fitting to your head, the shape of your head hats, and they can be made from a variety of materials. Well, they started out as nightcaps. And here's the ones that I found. I found this one from the Met Museum. And it is dated in late 16th, early 17th century. It is British, and you'll see that it's very heavily embroidered. It's just very ornate. It would have been an expert haberdasher would have been the one to make this. And all of the ones that I found are very ornate like this. The second one is actually what I believe to be a pattern for making a nightcap. The Folger Shakespeare Library has this one in their digital image collection online, and it's dated from a commonplace book of 1608, but it also lists a Thomas Trevelyan as having created it in 1548. So I'm not quite sure from all of the massive amounts of details the Folger Shakespeare Library has in their Hamlet catalog record, catalog record, that I'm not quite sure on the actual date of what I'm looking at here. But either way, whether it's 1548 or 1608, this one does come from the life of William Shakespeare, and you'll see that it matches the copy that they have at the Met in terms of style, because it is also a skull cap with the band that goes around, the base of your head and forms this very close-fitting warmth for your head. The third one comes from the Ritz Museum, which honestly, I haven't heard of this museum until I looked this up online, so I don't know what RISD stands for. But they are in Providence, Rhode Island, and I'll link to their website below. But this is a men's nightcap from 1580. And again, it just follows the same trend. So solidly, we can see that this was the popular style for William Shakespeare's lifetime, was for men to sleep in a cap that looks like this. It's the skull cap, highly embroidered. You would have ordered this made for you from a haberdasher. And I'm going to assume the increasing level in ornateness would go along with your ability to afford something more ornate. There is, at the BBC, lists a nightcap that belonged to Charles I. It's a lace nightcap, and it's very different because it's not embroidered, but you'll see it does still follow the same style. And let's see, what museum does it say that this is housed at? I can't read that very quickly, but this was posted on the BBC, A History of the World. This is the nightcap worn by Charles I, and it's white and lace. So there was some discrepancy in style and material and design based on how much wealth you had. And interestingly, the nightcap is actually connected to British judicial processes, because when someone was executed, they would often wear a nightcap over their face. That when you see in movies someone being executed and they have a sheet pulled down over their face, today in movies it looks like a pillowcase to me, but that has a basis in actual history. If you could afford to bring your own nightcap, it would be your nightcap that got pulled down over your face that way, and it was actually a sign of wealth and status to be able to bring your own nightcap. Now, why you would want to be worried about presenting your wealth and status on the scaffolding where you're about to be hung, I have no idea why that would matter at that point in your life. But for some people, apparently, it was their last show of worthiness before they were gone from this world. And so there is actually a book by, it doesn't say, but I found a collection of history on the British judicial system online that I will link to below this video as well. So be sure to check out below this on YouTube, or you can visit me at CassieCash.com. Each of these episodes has a short blog post that goes with it, so you can go back to the website and find all of my Learn More links and different places like this where you can read about sort of the tangents and side tales that go along with things like the nightcap. So if you want to read about the judicial system and how the nightcap was connected to that, make sure you check out the show notes. So it seems like William Shakespeare would have worn a nightcap, but unlike Santa Claus or Ebenezer Scrooge, his was going to be a skull cap and not something that had the pointy part hanging down behind his head. The Dictionary of Fashion History identifies several articles of night clothing, and this whole idea of wearing night clothing seems to be something that was birthed in England during William Shakespeare's lifetime. So like so many things during this Renaissance period, the world in general was changing how they did things. The Dictionary for Fashion History cites the 16th century as the turning point between when people slept with no clothes into when they started wearing a nightshirt or night clothes and a night hat. There are several things listed in here. Apparently, at some point, they would have worn a wig to bed, because the nightcap is specifically listed in this dictionary as having replaced the wig as what you're going to wear over your head at night. They also list night clothes, a night coif. Now, the night coif was specifically a woman's article of clothing. It's pretty close to a negligee in terms of its design and purpose. There was also the night kerchief, which was a handkerchief that you wore around your neck, again, for warmth when you're sleeping. And the night mask, I'm not quite sure. It seems from the reference from an M. Drayton, the Dictionary of Fashion History quotes a 1627 reference as calling a night mask plastered well within. So I'm not sure if this was actually a plaster mask that you would wear on your face or not, but its purpose was not to keep you warm. It was to prevent wrinkles. So apparently that was an issue in the 16th and 17th century as well. For men as well as women, they didn't want to have wrinkles. I will link you to the Dictionary of Fashion History. It is available on Google Books, and you can read more about the various night clothings from Shakespeare's lifetime there. Now, as you know about, or you may know, from Shakespeare's lifetime, around 1607 is when Jamestown was founded in what is now the United States. So this time period of Shakespeare's lifetime was when the British were coming over and trying to colonize what is now the United States. That's interesting to me because in a book about the fashion history of colonial America, the timeline overlaps with Shakespeare's lifetime. So it's interesting to me to look at what was going on in early colonial America, because you can get a taste for what things would have been like for Shakespeare, because the people who are coming over here and participating in colonial America were literally Shakespeare's friends and neighbors. So one book on the fashion of early colonial America talks specifically about caps and explains that they were used at night for nightcaps, but they were also used during the day, both because they were comfortable and because they were convenient. The book says, quote, "The nightcap was donned in the day as well as the night, outdoors as well as in, as a more convenient alternative to the hat." Nightcaps were available in a range of prices and materials. It goes on to explain more details and more materials about how you would get them or how they would be made. I was unable to confirm in time for this episode whether caps being worn during the day was something that was simply practical in colonial America, where they would have had less access and less materials to things like haberdashers for the making of multiple hats for various occasions, such that single nightcaps might have necessitated multiple uses, or if this was actually a trend back in London where William Shakespeare was writing. If you know the answer to that question, please leave me a comment below this video. That's it for this week. I'm Cassidy Cash. Thank you for being here and learning about Shakespeare's history along with me. I hope you learned something new about the Bard, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.